Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Unfiltered Vet Discussions. My name is Kelly, and we're being joined by Peter and Phil today. And we were ruminating about what's on our minds lately, because that's what we do when we all get together, be it on Zoom or in person. And we decided that we were talking about change a lot today. So the topic is let's discuss change because that touches a lot of things that are happening in our lives right now. And what drives us to change, because change can be hard. Even good change can be hard because it's still a change. And we have to adapt to that. Also, before we continue, just want to put in a plug. Come follow and like us on our social medias. There's multiple of them. Choose your platform. We're there. And also podcasts like Spotify, Apple, and Google. And if you follow us, you'll find out and get a notification once a week when our new podcasts drop. So please join us with that. So, gentlemen, let's open it up to the concept of change because partly we're talking about, well, what drives innovation? Somebody has to decide that perhaps today they think they can do something better that's already there, or they can do something that isn't there and create an innovative product, service, or business. Um, so that was one conversation that we were starting to have. And then sometimes change just force upon us, which is a different side of it. Like in marketing, I was saying marketing is a retroactive environment, digital marketing, because we don't get to choose when Google changes. We don't have any say over Facebook or social media platforms when they change. We just get to wake up and go, oh, look, they changed. Now we have to modify our marketing program to make sure that people are still seen in the new change environment, like AI, right? So we didn't ask that change. So there's two types change. We have to adapt to change because it arrives on our shores, or we wake up and go, I think I can do better. So there's two viewpoints of change.
Yeah, so Kelly, a lot of this started, I forgot the wave. A lot of this started with the fact that I can go out my garage and have 35 years of veterinary content that on the medical side, there has been upgrades and updates. On the management side, the more things change, the more they stay the same. The titles have been changed to protect the incompetent, but the content is pretty much the same. And we talk about this, and they talk about the veterinary profession as being reticent to change, glacial in its ability to handle change. And you were talking about you can either be a change agent
Mhm.
or a change victim.
Correct.
And of the 110,000 veterinarians and the 35 to 40,000 veterinary hospitals, I think there's a really interesting bell-shaped curve that exists amongst those practices that are trying to change by pulling everybody along. And then the other end of the bell-shaped curve is trying to keep change from happening by putting their feet in the ground. And it's a tug of war. And Phil, you deal with this because the impact on change in a work environment has an impact on the culture of the practice and the psychological safety, doesn't it?
Well, 100%. And what I would say is what's even interesting is the flip side to that is that the psychological safety or the idea that I feel like I'm in a workplace where I can take an interpersonal risk
Mm.
is that if that is not there, there won't be change because I don't feel comfortable bringing up an idea, that may be more effective, that may be, better, and that can be from a number of different reasons. If we have an authoritarian leader who said, "Look, we're doing it my way. We've done it for years," the old thing. The other thing though is the element. What's so fascinating about change, creating change, the implementation of change, and just change management in general is how impactful the human factor element to your point, Peter, is, and that how ingrained fear, is in that process. And that if I fear that I'm going to make a mistake, or if I fear that if I don't do this right, that I'm going to be judged on it. Or, let's say, when we go from, handwriting in charts, from 20 years ago, to doing electronic medical records. Well, what if, I'm someone that fears that I'm not great with computers, or I'm not great with this, and that if I do this, I'm going to lose my status, as the best technician, and all these things. So it's just, where I'm going with this is, it's just fascinating. The resistance to change almost always is fear, and whether that's from how I'm going to be, judged by my leader, by my peers, what that means to my status, in the company, all of those things. Just really, really fascinating stuff that we can go down the rabbit hole on. But Kelly, Peter.
I'd throw in imposter syndrome too,
Yeah.
because people are like, will I be found out if I can't do this? And then I would also throw in there, fear of change is manufactured. So we all have had children in this room, and thinking back to them, partly the hard part of raising a toddler is they have no fear. Like, they're just going to go try everything. So we created the fear somewhere.
So, for those of you who aren't neurobiologists and neuropsychologists, the area in the brain that responds to change is the amygdala, which is one of the reptilian portions of our brain. And the safe zone is to protect ourselves, and that goes back to survival of the fittest. The area of the brain that responds to torture is the amygdala. So, to many people, change is torture, and torture is change. Discuss.
Well, and on that, so what does activation of the amygdala do? Like, it shuts down our ability to access the moneymaker. Our up here, this is what, as clinicians, as managers, the prefrontal cortex, that's our thinker. Then when we're chill, when things are good, that sucker's firing, and the amygdala shuts it down. Because who needs to who needs to come up with 50 differentials for a vomiting cat when I'm being chased by a tiger? But what happens is that if we're in the environment, if I'm in that workplace environment where, when I make a mistake, when I bring up a bad idea, whenever, or I bring up an idea that the leader doesn't like, or anything, that I'm chastised for it, that I'm punished for it, that then I get reinforced, that my amygdala grows and says, if I do that, this is going to happen, triggers that, and it shuts down our ability to tap into that, which is why we, in fear-inducing environments, low psychological safety environments, we can't have change, because we can't access that broad, the broaden and build part of our brain when we're feeling connected. That gets totally shut down. And so that's what, it's just, again, it's fascinating, the connection, between fear, what that does to us as far as innovation goes. The other thing that I would say is, I want to do a shout out. We talk a lot about neurodiversity, is that for the most part, change, also innovation, wouldn't happen without those of us that have ADHD, because our brains are going, a million miles an hour. And there's a joke of, a plane shot itself because it flew, it was flying faster than the bullet that that it shot, and got hit by its own bullet. So that's kind of a great analogy of how an ADHD brain works. While we can come up with a lot of ideas for innovation, oftentimes we can confound the issue by, if we're in a leadership position, we throw out every single idea that comes to our brain and totally shut down our team because they don't know which orders to take. So that's is also learning how to focus that beam, and having a team that can bring that together is also really important. I know I squirreled because I do have ADHD, but it's fascinating seeing that how the innovation can be stymied by someone who doesn't understand how their brain works, and that they overload their team with too many ideas of what they want to implement, and nothing gets done because we have paralysis. And then if, it's even worse if the leader's like 2 weeks later, why didn't this get done? It's like, well, you told me 20 things to do this week. Like
Yeah.
I can't do 20 things.
And also like innovation and change. The world right now around us, the economy right now, external factors, let's use that. External factors are interesting. And you guys have probably seen this too on businesses and practices and hospitals. There are practices who are like digging in deep and refusing to change. Like, I can't handle it. I don't know why everything's not working for me, but I refuse to change. Right. And we're being asked to change and adapt now, or because we have some pressures on us, like just like we had to change quickly during COVID, right? Like all of a sudden that was on our shores and everybody had to make changes they never thought they could make in a very quick period of time, but we did because there was some external factors going on. Are people recognizing that there's external factors? Are they recognizing they're the barrier to their own success? Like we were talking, like, why can't I keep a vet? Why have I gone through 7 vets in the last 3 years? Where's the problem? Why is this change happening all the time? So where does the recognition come in that I needed to stop for a second, pause, and start just thinking with your upper cortex instead of reacting and going, where do I want this ship to go? And what am I willing to do for that?
So for those of you who want to rewind the memory tapes, we go back to March of 2020, about March 15th to be more specific.
Mhm.
At that point in time, at least in Orange County, California, they shut down the county for all intents and purposes. The next couple of days, things got ironed out. And the next 2 months, to the best of my knowledge, basically March, April, May, maybe a little bit into June, the veterinary profession was on the teetering of collapse, financially and psychologically, because they couldn't figure out how to deal with the pandemic that we were going through. And by the way, whomever listens to this and can tell me that they were the first practice in the freaking world to do curbside, I want to meet you who you are, and I will give you a Starbucks gift card. But all of a sudden, somebody came up with a solution,
Mhm.
and that was curbside options. On the other hand, there are those who said, screw it. I'm just going about my business and we'll just put on masks and Kevlar and, PPE and just see what happens. Somehow, everything tipped again in about June, July of 2020. And we went from on life support to basically running a perpetual sprint for almost 2 years.
Mhm.
And we were put into a situation as a profession where we had no choice but to change.
Mhm.
And some did really well,
Mhm.
and some lost entire staff, some lost all the doctors, etc. So change is part of life. You can fight it and get calluses, but what you really have to recognize is that change is feedback, and our bodies are all about feedback. I mean, we live on feedback mechanisms. And so, and Phil's got a great quote that he uses in his signature. Robert Kennedy, progress is a nice word, but change is its motivator and change has its enemies. So really, we've got to learn how to live with change. And there's one more quote I want to use. Everything you want is on the other side of fear.
Oh,
Oh, that's nice.
yeah.
Yeah.
Jack Canfield. Everything you want is on the other side of fear. And if there are practices out there that practice from fear everything that they do. And it goes back to a conversation we were having about malpractice lawsuits and everything else, which we'll talk about at a different time. So really, in my role at this point in time, I'm trying to make people to get comfortable being uncomfortable.
And one of the things that you said, Peter, is so, everything you say is on point, my friend. But just so prescient is the feedback loop. And that was what one of the things that we had done really well in our hospital with was, this growth mindset that, there's vulnerability, we're going to make mistakes, but what do? We're going to learn from those. So we act, we make a decision, we take as much evidence as we can, and also, not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. We make a decision, and then on that decision, then we say, what's working well? Where are we struggling? What have we learned? And then from that, then we put that back into into the hopper, and then we make another decision based on that. And, with curbside, that was one of the things we did is we would ask ourselves weekly or every other week, like quickly, hey, with what we're doing, what's working well? Where are we struggling? What have we learned? And what are we gonna do next? And that ability to have wiggle room and not be black and white and live in the gray area, one, from a human factors perspective, hugely impactful on human resilience. Like when we're black and white, it's all or nothing thinking. It's really hard to go one way or another. And in a volatile and an environment like that where we just don't know what's going to happen, we have to be able to live in that gray area. But that was just one of the things that was really, really helpful for us was, hey, we're gonna put this together and we're just gonna see what works. And I said to the team, the cool thing is we get to break all this crap down and we get to redo it from scratch. Like we've been doing this since before any of us got here. Like the protocols of how we see clients and all that. I said, so we get to kind of remake this the way that we want it. And so that was one of the things is we kind of got, I mean, again, with all the stress and everything that was going on, we got excited about the potential for change. And then also the agency and empowering of this, what the team was seeing with that feedback loop, and our dear friend, Andy Rourke, I love, one of the things he says that I love is he's like, I would rather have, a B or B plus idea that the team is totally bought into than an A double plus idea that I came up with that I shoved down the team's throat. And it's just so true is that buy-in from the team also hugely impactful for change management. I mean, we could spend a week talking on effective change management, but effective change management, not so much about the technology we're using and anything like it's changing human behavior, addressing fear, what's in it for me as the team, answering all those questions effectively is really what we what we want to do. But yeah, thanks for bringing up the feedback loop, Peter. That was reminding me like how impactful that was for us, in walking through that.
Mm-hmm. It's easy to forget though.
What you just said though, Phil, goes back to one of the significant weaknesses of many entrepreneurs, but more specifically in the veterinary field, is a lack of leadership skills. Because when you talk about force feeding, that's not what you need in an environment as we were dealing with during the pandemic. That's a dictatorial leader. What we really needed, and this is what I tried to emulate, was an empathetic leader, where you stop talking and start listening. So as I like to tell when I teach leadership, leaders' jobs our goals are to ask great questions and shut up. Leaders' jobs are to listen, absorb, and appreciate. But what do? We talk too much and we don't hear a word that anybody else is saying. And that's when you get pushback and you can't figure out why the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah, you have to have the team buy-in for change, or it's just you're dragging an elephant behind you. It's just doesn't work well without buy-in for change and the understanding the why and what we're doing. Um, it matters. It really does. And going back to COVID and those intense 2 years and the amount of change that happens and what lives on today from those moments, like big changes, right? Like there are events in people's life, like you get married, that's a big change. And then that ripples onward from there. You have a child, you get a different type of job, you get your doctorate degree. Those are big moments of change that ripple down and keep changing as the future unfolds, right? But there are things that I guess what I'm trying to say is don't just take things for granted with change, to keep deciding, is this how I want to live today? Right?
Yeah.
Both of you have your DVMs. You both made decisions like on your career paths. Both of you are deciding your future career paths. It's just not, I got my doctorate and now this is exactly how everybody who has their doctorate gets to live. You get to make those choices, right? And continue to do so.
Yeah. Around change and things changing and staying the same. There was a quote when I was taking this certification in applied positive psychology, and the quote said something to the effect of, today the students are liberal and entitled, the government is corrupt, and people don't want to do the work to change society or something. And you look at it, you read it, and then 2 slides later it was something to the effect of like Plato for 400 BC. And it's just that we have to understand that our thinking gets caught in this trap. And are we available to be curious and not judgmental, and ask these questions to impact change. And what I would say is, again, is like we have to be in an environment that supports those questions being asked, those tough questions being asked. And sometimes we're in an environment, in veterinary medicine where we may not feel safe to ask those questions of why is this the way it is, or why can't we change? And that can be multifactorial. It can be multiple different reasons why we don't feel safe asking those questions. But I'll say in smaller groups, it's very interesting when you have like-minded people. Well, people who understand the power of that psychological safety, to be able to have those discussions where, if Peter and I disagree with one another, we can disagree. Like we can say the why, but each of us will listen to the other without a sense of, I'm just going to shut down and not listen to what this person is saying. Is like genuinely saying, I respect this person, their experience, what they've been through, their opinion, and being open to the fact that I can, again, it goes back to that black and white thinking, is if Peter says something that goes against, something that I've held true for years, and I really believe what he says with the evidence that he's proven, then I have to ask myself, why am I, and I don't want to change my mind, why am I holding on to that old idea? Because it's not the evidence. He's put out the reason why, from an evidence perspective, and then we have to ask it. And then again, we get back to fear. We get back to, these emotional reasons why we're resistant to change, that have nothing to do with, us being evidence-based practitioners. Is that we're wrapped up in old thinking, or, old ways. So just really, really fascinating. There's a book called Think Again by Adam Grant, that goes over that. That's really, for the listeners, it's a good one to ask ourselves, why, oh yeah, I got, why we hold on to those old ideas.
So would it be interesting if at some convention at some point you don't walk into a room with chairs and a lecture and a screen at the top? You walk into an environment where you have to be curious to figure out something and listen to each other. I don't know what that would look like. I mean, I would have to sit and think about it, but talk about a different way of having an experience to learn about yourself for change is being curious again and an active participant in listening to somebody else, because we have such a strong cancel culture going on right now. Right? Like the act of active listening, Phil, is like a lost art in my mind.
Kelly, that concept alone of walking into a room and actually having somebody assign your seat for you is just a place to start because and then every break you reassign where people sit. I mean, that's making people uncomfortable. There's so much that we've talked about, but we're probably getting close to where we have to start to wrap things up. But there's a term that we that has been coming up more and more with respect to the veterinary profession in the past, and a need of greater consequence going forward, that truly talks about the ability to adapt to change, and that's resilience.
Mhm.
And Brene Brown, resilience is the ability to bounce back from adversity, cope with stress and trauma, and move forward in life. Mel Robbins, adversity, the capacity to be authentic and humble, recognizing when you've been knocked down and then choosing to stand back up.
Yeah.
I think we, as a profession, need to look for those attributes of resilience in our teams, in ourselves, and nurture those.
Yeah.
Because I do think that failure isn't fatal, but failure to change might be.
Yeah.
John Wooden.
And Peter, along with that concept, which is right alongside of it, there's this concept of anti-fragility, or like not to that point of resilience, not letting everything break me down. And I'll say there's really an interesting is an interesting discussion to be had, that again we have to have safe places, a psychologically safe environment to have those discussions. But we'll talk about, for instance, we've talked about childhood trauma and adverse childhood experiences and things like that. And one of the things that has helped me is realizing the world isn't responsible to know what my triggers are, the things that are gonna, I to walk in this world, with some degree of peace and serenity. I have to do the work to be able to process through those, because if the world has to do everything that I want it to do, I'm gonna live a life that's very challenging. And so I think again is how do we have those discussions, and this is a whole, I think we've added another discussion for another time, but there is that what is resilience, what is anti-fragility, what does that mean to us as professionals, what does that mean to us as human beings moving forward, to be able to address some of those things. But yeah, this concept of anti-fragility and grit, but not stupid grit, where we push through things, but we don't bang our heads against the wall unnecessarily. That's another really interesting concept. So thanks for bringing that up.
Can I call that bull grit?
Of course, yes.
Yes.
Because you will all your ability for quick-wittedness, sir, is known throughout the profession.
Yes.
So yes, thank you for bringing that to us.
Yeah. So Peter, wrap us up today, because you're so good at it.
Well, I think what we really wanted to do today is just make you be introspective for yourself, for your team, and for our profession. Because, to quote Marshall Goldsmith, what got us here won't get us there. And we're at a point in time, and I've been calling it an inflection point, that we have to stop doing it the way we've done it and start to figure out what we're going to look like going forward. And it's not just in clinical practice, it's in education, it's in regulatory, it is in technology and AI and everything else, we have to start to come up with new ways of doing things because the consumers of our services at all levels are finding options outside of our control, and the external variables are forcing us to change, which is a lot more uncomfortable than if we start to control those changes ourselves. So if we did nothing else but to make you think about change, innovation, getting comfortable being uncomfortable, then I think we've accomplished a lot in the last 30 minutes or so.
Indeed. And with that, we will wish you adieu. Thank you for joining us on Unfiltered Vet Discussions, and we will look forward to being in a podcast near you for next time. Have a great day.